Welcome everyone to Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda. I'm your host, the Sultry Korey Gunz, back from vacation last week and back in the saddle with Tom Colohue, Wrestling Insider. Tom, what a weekend of wrestling we just had and to talk about for some good reasons and some bad reasons as well, but definitely an interesting weekend to say the least.
Absolutely. You went on holiday for the biggest wrestling week in about a decade. That's bad planning, sir. I like that you managed to fit the word sultry in there. I did have a challenge to add that myself. Our bosses were very keen to make sure we slid that in.
Yeah, for sure. I listened to the show last week with you and Gary, and I think that may be something that sticks. Maybe we got to figure out a way.
Is that a nickname? That's a bit of branding you want, is it?
Yeah, I was gonna say maybe we got to figure out how to make some money off that. Make it a T-shirt or make it a Twitter hashtag. We got to do something.
Oh yeah, we'll make you T-shirts. Just Sultry Korey.
Well, as you mentioned, a big weekend that we just had in wrestling, and so let's get right into it. Biggest topic of the day and this week has got to be the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view that took place on Sunday. We're not going to do a full review of the pay-per-view as we've done at other times, but we are going to talk about the two Hell in a Cell matches themselves. A lot to dissect and unpack here. We'll start with the women's Hell in a Cell with Sasha Banks and Becky Lynch. Becky Lynch defending and retaining the Raw Women's Championship. Really good match, very physical match. Probably one of, if not the best women's match we've seen this year. I don't think that would be up for much debate. There's even been reports I've seen today that Sasha Banks may have sustained a back injury during the match, which would probably come as no surprise seeing the suplex that she took on the stack of chairs there at the finish. But just a really good match. I know we talked about it for a couple of weeks leading up to the show that you had the feeling that Sasha Banks would come away with the women's title in this match, that was really what this build-up was all about since her return to the company. And then Becky Lynch goes out and retains the championship. How surprised were you at the outcome of this match with Becky retaining as opposed to Sasha taking the title?
I was shocked, I've got to be honest. I expected when Sasha did come back, she came in on such a wave and she did the big heel turn and she went into the feud straight away against Becky, as I had hoped she would upon her return. And she got a very big sustained push. She was a key figure. The four horsewomen were the only women really worth talking about at the time. And coming into this pay-per-view, it was a two-match card. I know they threw a lot of extra in there and only one was announced before Sunday, but it was a two-match card. Both the Cell matches, Becky and Sasha and Seth and Wyatt. These women went in there as the pinnacle women in the company. That's the way they were presented at the time. So for Sasha to come out the loser as clean as can be in a Cell, I was very surprised, very shocked, but at the same time she came out looking absolutely great. It was an incredible match.
Yeah, I was going to mention and talk to you about that despite the finish or the result of the match, I don't think it could be argued that both of these women, quote-unquote, got over in the match. They both ended up in a better position, and I think probably in a better spot in the fans' eyes than they did at the start of the match. And overall, you would think that for a main event type level match like this, that's really the thinking or the purpose of the match, or at least should be going in, is that no matter who wins or loses, that both competitors come out better for it, is it not?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's whenever any wrestling company puts out a match, the hope is that both players will come out better for it. That doesn't happen all that often. Not everyone gets long enough in a match to do it, but this was hardcore in the extreme. Both women really put their bodies on the line. I would not be surprised at all if Sasha was really feeling it. She doesn't have the extra bulk and muscle that Becky has, so she is a bit more susceptible to injuries, and they both put themselves through hell. It was very fitting of the match stipulation that they had.
Yeah, hopefully any injury that Sasha sustained, hopefully is not anything major that will put her on the shelf for an extended period of time, and kind of ruin this momentum that she's going to have going forward after this match. So hopefully she will be back pretty soon. After this match, again, I think it probably couldn't be argued that it's the best women's match that we've seen this year. And I know in the past couple weeks on your Twitter, you have answered some questions that people have asked you about the possibilities of a Women's Evolution 2 pay-per-view on the network. No plans have really been solidified, but just this week, you mentioned some comments that Triple H made that maybe alluded to the fact that a Women's Evolution pay-per-view could still be in play or in the cards for sometime this year. Can you give us any update on the possibility of a Evolution pay-per-view? And do you think that this match in particular went any distance in swaying the powers that be in having another all-women's pay-per-view one way or another, specifically in the positive direction after seeing the match that Sasha and Becky put on at Hell in a Cell?
My reports about Evolution came out just after SummerSlam, when Sasha Banks had just come back and the women's tag team titles were a bit more prominent. I reached out to some people, I asked some questions, and they said the conversation has continued. It seems more feasible now because the situation as per roster has developed. You've got to remember they're missing Ronda Rousey, they're missing Nia Jax, they're missing Ruby Riott. These are long-term injuries to important figures. Obviously, NXT need the women that they have at the moment. There hasn't been another Mae Young Classic, but that is something being rumoured. The report this week was from Stephanie Chase on Digital Spy, who interviewed, I should say, Triple H and asked about this. And he said it is still on the table, still up in the air as to what will happen and what will go down. There's only so much we can accomplish and have it done correctly. You don't want to half-arse it. Which is fair. That is a very fair comment. You don't want to half do this, but at the same time, you look at the landscape they've got, and we're not going to see women wrestling in a pay-per-view now until Survivor Series. It's not too far away, but it is still further away than Crown Jewel, and this is a very busy time. There's two things likely to happen here. Either one, we're not going to see a lot of women's matches for a while because they've got nothing to build up towards. Or two, we're going to start to see feuds added. You look at, for example, Becky talking up Asuka on Raw. They're building to something there. They're very unlikely to be wrestling at Survivor Series given the Raw versus SmackDown nature of it. Would you start building for something when you have to wait till December? I'm not sure. Possibly they would. We've also got to consider that Crown Jewel is taking place on a Friday. They've got to fill a SmackDown. So maybe we'll see a SmackDown special. Thursday, sorry. It's taking place on a Thursday, but obviously with the travel involved, it does sort of make that SmackDown infeasible. I just checked my working out there. I've reached out to try and find out if there's any update as to Evolution. At the moment, all I'm being told is that nothing is set in stone. It was a very late decision last year. When Stephanie McMahon announced it, a lot of the roster weren't aware of it. So I remain hopeful. I know that there is a continued optimism in the company that it will happen. So we'll have to wait and see.
Well, for all the things right and positive with the women's Hell in a Cell match, the men's match was the antithesis of that. Seth Rollins and the Fiend inside of the cell. The match is, I guess, ruled a no contest. Seth Rollins retains the title, referee stoppage. So there, a lot of people were saying, well, it was a DQ finish. It really wasn't even a DQ. It was just a referee stoppage of the match. So the match just ends. I don't even know where to start with this time. I'm a little bit lost for it. Just the first thought that came to mind watching this pay-per-view, and I did watch it live, was just why? Why was this the finish that they went with? It was the second year in a row where the main event of a Hell in a Cell match ended in a DQ / stoppage, no contest. if you were going to book this match, if you weren't going to put the title on Bray Wyatt, which me and you discussed a couple weeks ago about that we thought that at this point they almost would have to put the title on Bray Wyatt in this situation. They don't. So if they weren't going to put the title on him, why book them in the cell? You probably could have got away with a finish like this if it wasn't inside of Hell in a Cell, but because it was, it just falls flat, and the crowd just totally craps on the finish. I retweeted a video on Twitter that I actually hadn't seen until the time I retweeted it, of Seth Rollins leaving ringside and leaving the arena, and the crowd is just going ballistic, throwing trash and cups and everything at him. There's all kinds of staffers around him, hovered around him, trying to help him get out of the arena. Just not a good scene, not a good look for the WWE. What were your thoughts? Just first tell me, just when that finish happened, what were your initial thoughts watching it live when the bell rang and it was a no contest, this match was over?
Well, first of all, I want to say Seth Rollins is a consummate professional, maintained his character, walked out in the face of all that, still selling the beating he'd taken. Credit to him, this was in no way his fault. We did talk about this, we did mention that Bray Wyatt had to win this. This was not a case of there was an easy screw way out of it. He had to win this. And it's not just the finish, it's the whole match itself was just geared against him. He got very little offense in at all. Sister Abigail was kicked out of, which is incredibly rare. And the mallet, he pulled out the giant toy mallet, and it was used very briefly, mostly against him, and then it vanished. And then he spent the last 10 minutes or so just laying flat on his back in the ring, getting beaten up. This is the Fiend. This is who you've been building. And from what I can tell, sure, he can kick out of a lot, but he's not dangerous. He's not threatening. He laid down and he took his beating. He waited till the match was over to pop back up again. There are so many better ways to do that. So many. Even just Undertaker style sitting up at some point. Just at some point, do something. The whole match, they were just slow. They were idle. I get what they were trying to go for. It didn't work. The red lighting was, I don't know what they were trying to do with that. I don't know if it's because it was a red cell and they wanted to make it look extra ominous. I get the visuals. Bray Wyatt does like his visuals. But at some point, you still have to have a wrestling match. At some point, you have to forget all the pageantry and all the showmanship. I'm a big fan of all that, but at some point, you've still got to have a wrestling match. This was not competitive. And then you look at the finish. It's a Hell in a Cell match. Bray Wyatt's been kicking out. You look back at Undertaker against Triple H, Hell in a Cell, WrestleMania 28. I know Shawn Michaels was the referee, but he didn't stop it, and Undertaker kept kicking out of sledgehammers and everything there. You've got DX versus a McMahon, daddy and son, as it were, in Hell in a Cell. Triple H literally breaks a sledgehammer off of Vince McMahon's head. Match doesn't get thrown out. What the hell is going on? Are you being extra PG? If so, who for? This is Hell in a Cell. I do not understand it. And the reaction was exactly what we expected. We talked about this. Exactly what so many other people expected. I don't think anyone's dead and buried here. I don't think anyone's ruined. I don't think the mystique is gone. But I think it's harmed. And there were a lot of boos for Seth Rollins. His character has simply stopped being popular. Putting him against Bray Wyatt was a bad move for Seth. And honestly, I think it was a bad move for Bray. This was too early. Just far too early.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I thought it was way too early for them to be having a match. I thought it was definitely way too early if you're going to put them inside of the cell. Like I said, you could maybe get away with a screwy finish if they were just in a regular match, but to have them throw them inside the cell, you're telling your audience, hey, there's going to be a finish. You know, it's Hell in a Cell, it's The Fiend, it's Seth Rollins, there's going to be a finish. And so that was intriguing to me as a fan at the beginning. It's okay, they're inside of Hell in a Cell, so what are they going to do? Are they going to put the title on this new character that's hugely over and is riding all this momentum in The Fiend, or are they going to have Seth Rollins be the guy that conquers The Fiend and kind of puts him down and continues this monster role that he's been on? And then it just went away. Like you said, I think the mystique of Bray's character was hurt. Obviously, Seth Rollins was hurt by the crowd reaction. His character is going to be damaged. I didn't understand as a fan, and I'm not a wrestling booker. I'm not in the wrestling business, so I'm just speaking as a fan. But to some of the points that you alluded to, the mallet, Bray Wyatt's mallet was 5 times the size of the sledgehammer, and he doesn't get DQ'd or the match doesn't get stopped when he uses the mallet on Seth Rollins, but then Seth Rollins hits him once with a regular sledgehammer, and that's too much. That's too violent. We're led to believe that that's what gets the match stopped. The PG rating that you suggested, if they're trying to be PG, they stop the match after Rollins hits him with the sledgehammer, but then afterwards, Seth Rollins is puking up blood as he's got Bray Wyatt's fingers down his throat, which I thought was a awesome visual. I put on Twitter that it made me uncomfortable in a good way. Like watching it was very dramatic and it made me uncomfortable, but I think, as you said, I'm a big fan of visuals and building the drama and maybe even ticking up the violence a little bit. So you can't use that as an excuse that, well, we're PG, we don't want to, go too gory and violent. I said the guy was vomiting blood with a guy's fingers down his throat at the end, so that's not an excuse.
Yeah, and they could use that. They could simply have changed when the match ended. If you stop the match when that happens,
yeah,
Rollins retains the championship. No one's going to boo the guy who was throwing up blood, and that's why the match finished. And Wyatt looks absolutely incredible. He can then make the point, championships don't matter, I just wanted to make friends. He can build off all of that and really justify it. It's understandable if someone is losing that much blood out of their mouth that they have to stop the match. That's fine. It's certainly a lot better than one sledgehammer shot on a chair.
Yeah, just a lot of just things that just did not make sense. The crowd response, I don't think I've seen a crowd revolt against a match finish that vocally and that strongly in a long time. I'm not even sure. I was at WrestleMania when Brock Lesnar and Roman Reigns main evented, and Brock Lesnar retained. That was being there live. That was a pretty tense situation, but I'm not sure maybe since then there hasn't been a result that incensed the crowd the way that this one did. I think this one probably was even on another level than the Roman Brock finish. Do you think that the response that the crowd had so vehemently, just basically rejecting this result, do you think the fact that just 2 nights prior on SmackDown, when they did the 9-second squash of Kofi with Brock Lesnar, do you think that maybe had a residual effect for this match, that we kind of got too... Brock and Kofi wasn't a screwy finish, but the fact that they just squashed their champion in 9 seconds for the sake of a Brock Lesnar Cain Velasquez match, which we could do a whole other segment on that maybe at another time. But do you think that maybe hurt the Fiend Rollins match and the result, with the fact that we had just had a result that was wildly unpopular just 2 nights before on SmackDown?
Absolutely. You had back-to-back World Championship matches where nobody really won. Even though Brock Lesnar took the WWE title, nobody really won in that situation. Nobody comes out looking better. We talked about this for Sasha and Becky. The idea is for both men to come out looking great. And I know that we're going to get the storyline about Kofi. Oh, he was overzealous. He went charging in. It was a mistake. He won't make that mistake again. And maybe we'll even get a rematch, which could be at least respectable. But you're not going to get past that visual. You're not going to get past that moment. There is such a wealth of people who were furious about that. And then you took them into your pay-per-view and you made it worse. They can get it back. There are ways to get it back. But you cannot crush all of your top baby faces at once. You can't do that. You consider as well, a lot of people would have been unhappy with Sasha Banks not winning. Thankfully, the man is very popular, so we were able to assuage some of that. Seth Rollins is very popular, but not in this instance. In this instance, he has been outweighed. It's going to be difficult to come back.
Well, there was a lot of intrigue for the following night's Monday Night Raw for that very point that you made, to kind of see what was WWE going to do as a way to come back from this finish, or what direction were they going to go now after this went so poorly the night before. And it would appear that the reaction they had was to have no reaction at all. Kind of out of sight, out of mind. Neither Seth Rollins nor The Fiend appears on Raw. There was very little even talked about the match, other than to say that it ended in controversial fashion and that Seth Rollins retained the championship. You mentioned to me that there was maybe a contentious production meeting that took place even before Raw last night about this very fact, about what went down at Hell in a Cell. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the word contentious obviously has quite a lot of meaning. In this regard, I'll just say Paul Heyman, in charge of Raw, was obviously in a production meeting with Vince McMahon, in which they were deciding how Raw was going to go. They lay it out earlier and they work on it from there. Paul Heyman was not happy with that situation. I don't think Vince McMahon was very happy with that situation as a result, but he certainly was going into it quite happy with the results that they'd organised. And they had to have that discussion, and the discussion was definitely had, in which they came up with where they're going to go moving forwards, because if you have that every week, you're going to have no viewers. It's really that simple. I don't know where the idea came from to not mention it at all. Maybe the plan is much like they had with Balor and Wyatt, to separate the two and make sure there's no rematch. We've got a draft coming up. It could be that they're changing brands on that one. So there may also have been an element whereby Paul Heyman wanted Bray Wyatt on his show and didn't get him. We will see in the coming weeks about that one, but I know it was a tense moment in the production meeting where they just had to have that discussion, clear the air a little bit, and decide where they were going next. I don't think not mentioning it was the right way, personally.
Probably one of the biggest thing to talk about when it comes to Raw is the fact that there wasn't much to talk about. It was billed as a superstar showcase, with the draft coming up. So really not many storylines were furthered. No really new feuds were developed. There's just kind of a lot of matches that were there for the sake of having matches. Was that the plan going into Raw last night from the get-go, or do you think that because the finish to Hell in a Cell went so poorly that there were some plans that changed, like you mentioned, maybe in that production meeting of, let's just get through tonight, let's get to the draft on Friday, and kind of just hit the reset button from there?
I know that there were a few little changes and tweaks based around Hell in a Cell. I don't necessarily know that it was because of the finish to that match. It might have been, for example, if Sasha was injured, they may have needed to fill a segment there, and that may be how we got Ricochet, Apollo Crews, for example, which was a good match and a good chance for both men to showcase. The concept of the showcase, as it were, it tends to be right before a draft, or in fact on the draft itself, watch the losers. Because the losers of the show tend to be the ones who are moving. When you talk about showcases, you had the women's match. Once again, Becky and Charlotte were on a team. That seems to be their way of just trying to make Charlotte face. And it might have just been an attempt to, crowd please with quite a lot of it. I know Heyman had already planned out how he was going to do the Braun Strowman and Tyson Fury segment. Vince was involved in that as well. So that was already set in stone. But the decision to not mention the Hell in a Cell finish was made late on, so they definitely needed to fill some time with that. And it gave a few opportunities, it gave us a few longer matches, but did it give us anything memorable? Gotta say no.
No, there definitely wasn't. Like I said, it was the biggest thing to me was that it was 3 hours and nothing really to talk about. I said, some people may have thought the Tyson Fury deal, with the fact with him being on Raw and starting this angle with Braun Strowman, maybe was a big deal. I'm not a huge boxing fan, so to me, I could take it or leave it. For some people may feel differently. But yeah, just nothing. It was a 3-hour show of just things that didn't matter. And like I said, and you've got the biggest story of the night, which was the Fiend and Seth Rollins, weren't even heard from. Now, if you've seen, there is video circulating on Twitter. I saw this morning that the Fiend did make an appearance after the cameras had stopped rolling. He attacked Cesaro after the big melee between Strowman and Tyson Fury. So the Fiend did appear, and from the sound of the video, the crowd popped huge for that. But no Seth Rollins at all, which is also pretty peculiar. Again, I know he's probably selling the beating that he took in the cell, but for the last show before your draft to not have your Universal Champion even make an appearance on the show, even that would seem a little bit strange.
I agree with that. Seth Rollins has been a pivotal part of Monday Night Raw for a long time. He's been the key man, at least since Roman started his hiatus. And even before that, to be honest, with the amount of time he spent as the Intercontinental Champion and really pushing that hard, it's strange not to have him there, especially, as I mentioned, he did not actually take very much of a beating. Other than that final section, where admittedly he was bleeding from the mouth, there's not that much to sell. I don't know, maybe we're going to have Bray Wyatt playing up the where is Seth angle, but then that's ruined by the fact that Seth's going to be the captain of a team for Crown Jewel, which strikes me as an even more peculiar decision. It was just a mess all round. So many things have gone wrong. But one positive I do get out of Raw, Rusev looked great.
Yeah, he kicked off Raw. They kind of got off to a hot start with that and with him. And I saw your tweet earlier today that, maybe it's going to revive Rusev Day with this angle with Bobby Lashley and Lana. And maybe that's the way that they kind of get his career back on track.
So far, so good. They got a good chant going. He beat up Randy Orton and Baron Corbin, which is very unusual to beat up even one of them. But to do that with both was very good. I'm not sure Lashley or Lana come out of this looking great, but Rusev's definitely on the right track.
Well, let's wrap up with a couple of news bits here on a couple different reports that you've had out recently, and also want to get your thoughts on a couple of topics. First, let's talk about The Rock. We saw him Friday on the premiere of SmackDown on Fox. What can you tell us about his appearance and kind of some of the things that led up to what his role was on the season premiere of SmackDown?
I got a little love for this, which I just want to say thank you to everyone who sent me shout-outs for that. It was a very good feeling. But I do have to thank the people who did come to me and talk to me about this. It was on Tuesday, I believe it was. Someone said to me, The Rock wants to work with Becky Lynch. He's going to be very disappointed if he doesn't get the chance. He's talking to people. We'll see what happens. I reported that because I felt that's a good bit of information. People will enjoy hearing about that. And then on the day, of course, it happened. He was involved with Becky Lynch. He was involved with Baron Corbin. The original script, to my knowledge, did not involve Becky Lynch. It was simply Baron Corbin coming out, speaking up SmackDown, speaking down the crowd, and then The Rock comes out to defend SmackDown. There was an idea that maybe The Rock and Becky Lynch would cross paths on the way up and down the ramp. Rock wanted a bit more. Rock got a bit more. It was a very hot segment. The most watched Ratings-wise, the highest rated installment of wrestling, those 15 minutes, all week in a very action-packed week. So great for Becky Lynch. Good for The Rock. Very happy to see him giving back in that way, as has been his way for quite a while now, because people are always watching whenever The Rock's on. So it was good to get the report, good to share it, good to get further information later on afterwards, once I knew for certain that the person who reported it definitely knew exactly what was going on. And great to see.
We had another big return on Wednesday night as well on the NXT brand when we saw Finn Balor surprisingly make a return to the brand that he started on. We know we talked on previous episodes about the fact that there may be some roster fluidity that we're still, we weren't sure, and it looks like NXT is not going to be officially part of the draft coming up, but that there would be an NXT roster, and maybe we would see some names flexing between the Raw and SmackDown shows and NXT, or even some big names that may return and be exclusive to the NXT brand. Finn Balor looks like maybe the beginning of that. Are there some other names that you're hearing that might be on the short list for soon to be debuting or coming over to NXT on Wednesdays?
It's been a little while now since I've heard like a bit of a hubbub about a shortlist. I've heard it referred to as the shortlist, or the list as it were. I think people are just maybe mocking Jericho and the list of Jericho a little bit. Fair enough. Wrestling's fun. That's why not. I got a bit of information about names. Apparently people have been going to Triple H and to Vince McMahon and saying, look, I want to spend time on NXT, or I want to go back to NXT. We saw that with Tyler Breeze and Fandango. From what I've heard, Asuka was the top of that list. She is now a champion, so I find it unlikely she'll be moving to NXT, but given the championship that she holds, she may be appearing in NXT. That's a very good way to pop a rating down in NXT if you announce a women's tag title match. There's a few other names on there. I know Cesaro wanted to be more involved down there. I say down there, it's more of a sideways step now. But he did have his match in NXT UK, so that seems to be that it may have satisfied that. There's a few more people who see it as an opportunity to branch out, see it as an opportunity to get a bit more involved. They look at the career of maybe Drew Gulak, who moved from 205 to NXT, came back and became a champion. It's a good way to get a bit more attention on yourself, especially with NXT on USA now. There are still people asking, there is still a short list. There will be more movements to NXT.
We'll look forward to see who might pop up over there on Wednesday nights. Last thing I want to touch on with you, obviously we've got the draft coming up on Friday, and then we'll continue on until next Monday. We won't talk again before the draft actually happens, so I wanted to hear from you any bold predictions about who might go where, or anything you've heard about where some big names might end up. And I do want to ask you as well, we've talked today about maybe the WWE not being the best at planning ahead in some cases. Should we read anything into some of the names and faces that we saw on the SmackDown intro video on Friday? That we saw, some that I noticed are off the top. We saw Becky Lynch. We saw Seth Rollins, The Fiend, Drew McIntyre. Should we read anything into the fact that they're, that those superstars were pictured on the SmackDown intro, to the fact that maybe those are the names that are actually going to be on the SmackDown brand? Or is that just kind of a one-night deal, focusing on some of the top stars in the company, and it's not really going to have any relation to the actual draft? I would love to think that they wouldn't be that blatant about it, that they would put an intro up that would spoil the draft a week before it happens, but I guess anything, nothing would necessarily surprise me at this point. But so give me some of your maybe some bold predictions about what we might see happen at the draft and who might be moving brands.
Well, the advertising and the marketing, as well as the intro video, they were definitely displaying their top stars to try and bring people in. I think a lot of people took it as read that Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins were going to SmackDown. When you look at the results from Hell in a Cell, that looks a lot less likely. Brock Lesnar, we're still not sure. Even though he's a champion now, we still can't be sure. There still could be a trade of the top titles. There still could be a system whereby for at least a little while. Both titles go on to Raw, and then maybe a Survivor Series, they have a chance to win one back. There's a lot of different things possible, and it's hard to spoil a draft because I can honestly say very few names have been conclusively determined as to who will be going where. It gets worse every year. Earlier this year, they made a lot of changes in the Superstar Shake-Up. The next week, they changed some of them back. It's been getting worse every year. Vince McMahon is notorious for changing his mind and not giving people the information they were looking for. There's a few people I expect to move. Kevin Owens is one of them. He's moved every single time. I expect he will move again. His storyline is very clear, cut and dry, wrapped up now. And when you look at that, storylines are wrapped up. I think maybe Daniel Bryan will be going to Raw. Conversely, Bray Wyatt seems fairly certain now. If Rollins is staying on Raw, I think Wyatt is probably moving to SmackDown. Sasha Banks, same thing. I expect she'll be moving to SmackDown to bring that a bit of extra star power and to be a star over there, to be a real focus of that division. Big stays. I think Nia Jax will stay on Raw. That's going to be a big stay when she does return. Asuka's going to be an interesting one. At the moment, she is technically on SmackDown. I suspect she might be going to Raw. Beyond that, I don't think I can be certain at this time. It's very hard to say. But when it comes to the draft, even changes that are made on the night might not still be there the next week.
Yeah, that's my biggest thing with this draft is I hope that whatever decisions they do make, that they stick with it. I hope we don't get another wild card rule or anything like that. I hope they make some rosters, stick with it, and that's the direction they go, at least for a year or so and kind of see where they can go with it. And I know that you said that the plan has been all along for Survivor Series to be Raw versus SmackDown themed. So you got to think that they would have some definitive rosters in order to make that concept work.
You would hope so. That is the plan. But Vince McMahon.
Right. Things can always change, for sure. Well, I appreciate you being with us again on Dropkick DiSKussions, Tom, and I appreciate everybody listening and checking us out on YouTube. Remind you again, follow Tom on Twitter at Colohue. You can follow me on Twitter if you would like at Korey Gunz. And make sure that you subscribe to the Sportskeeda YouTube channel so that you can check out all of our episodes of Dropkick DiSKussions. Make sure you like, share, comment, get the word out there about the good things that we're doing over here at Sportskeeda. I said in the fact that we've got, for my money, the best wrestling insider in the business today in Tom Colohue, doing some work for us and appearing almost weekly with me, and I can't appreciate that enough. Tom, anything you want to leave with us before we get out of here?
No, I think we've covered pretty much everything, and we even managed to tell everyone about your sultry nature.
The cat's out of the bag. It's a
cat's
secret
out of the
no
bag.
more. All right, well, we appreciate you, everybody, listening, and enjoy the rest of your wrestling week. Enjoy the draft, and we will be back with you talking about all things draft and SmackDown and Raw next week right here on Dropkick DiSKussions presented by Sportskeeda.